In the freezing winter air of a small square, a little girl knelt, shivering from the cold, clutching a German Shepherd puppy to her chest. Opposite her, a wealthy young man sneered, for he believed that money was synonymous with power. Not far away, a quiet man observed it all, who would soon teach him a lesson in humility. Before we begin, please let me know where you are watching from. Subscribe for more of my stories. Snow had been falling since dawn, covering the mountain town in a silence so complete it felt ancient, as if winter itself were holding its breath. Jack Miller stood at the edge of the town square, boots half buried in packed snow, shoulders squared beneath a weathered dark jacket that had once been part of a uniform. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with a broad, compact build shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. His face was sharply defined, cheekbones cut like stone, a short, uneven beard shadowing a jaw that rarely relaxed. Faint scars traced his knuckles, and one thin line ran near his left eyebrow, barely visible unless the light struck just right. His eyes were a cold gray, alert but tired, the eyes of a man who had learned to watch before he acted. Jack was a Navy SEAL K-9 handler on mandatory leave, though no dog sat at his side. 6 months earlier, in a mission that ended too late and too loud, he had lost the partner who had once moved with him like a second heartbeat. Since then, the absence had followed him everywhere, heavier than any pack he had ever carried. He hadn't come to the square for warmth or company. He stood there because the quiet helped him think, and because standing watch, even over nothing, felt better than sitting still. Snowflakes gathered on his shoulders and beard, melting slowly against the heat of his skin, while his mind drifted in the controlled, guarded way it always did now, circling memories he refused to touch directly. He noticed everything without seeming to: the flicker of a broken street lamp, the empty benches crusted in ice, the distant sound of a bus grinding its way uphill. That was when he saw her. Emily Carter stood near the center of the square, kneeling awkwardly in the snow, as if she had slipped and decided not to stand again. She was small, maybe in her early 20s, with a slender frame that looked even more fragile under a thin, worn winter coat. Strands of chestnut-brown hair escaped from a loose-knit hat, sticking to her pale cheeks, where tears had already frozen. Her skin was light and freckled, her nose reddened by the cold, and her hands, bare except for fingerless gloves, trembled as she shielded something against her chest. Emily had the look of someone used to being overlooked, shoulders drawn inward, eyes that avoided confrontation until fear forced them up. What she was protecting was a German Shepherd puppy. The puppy couldn't have been more than 3 months old. His fur was a soft blend of black and tan, still too fluffy to lie flat, his ears only half standing and wobbling as he shifted. One paw tucked instinctively against his chest, the other pressed into Emily's coat, as if he knew this thin layer of fabric was the only thing keeping the cold away. His eyes were dark and wide, reflecting the white world around him with raw confusion. He shivered constantly, not just from the cold, but from hunger and exhaustion, and each shallow breath puffed weakly into the air. Emily had named him Max, a hopeful name for a creature that barely seemed strong enough to carry it. Jack's attention sharpened when a third figure entered the space between them. Ryan Cole moved through the snow like it didn't belong to him. He was tall and well-fed, his body wrapped in an expensive wool coat with a fur-lined hood that framed a clean, confident face. His blond hair was styled neatly despite the wind, and his boots left shallow prints, never quite sinking into the snow the way everyone else's did. Ryan was in his mid-20s, broad-shouldered but soft in a way that suggested a life without real consequence. His smile came easily, too easily, and it stayed even as his eyes hardened. He had the posture of someone accustomed to space bending around him, of people stepping aside without being asked. Jack recognized the type instantly. Ryan laughed, the sound loud and careless against the hush of falling snow. He said something Jack couldn't hear at first, gesturing loosely with one gloved hand as if the entire scene amused him. Emily flinched at the sound, pulling Max closer, her body angling instinctively to shield the puppy. Jack saw her lips move in a quiet plea, saw her shake her head. Ryan stepped closer anyway, boots crunching inches from her knees. The puppy let out a thin, frightened sound, more breath than bark. That was when Ryan lifted his foot. It wasn't a wild movement. It was casual, practiced, the kind of motion made by someone who had never been stopped before. His leg drew back, the polished sole of his boot angling toward the small, trembling body in Emily's arms. Jack moved before the thought fully formed. He crossed the distance in a few long strides, his movements controlled and economical, the way they had been drilled into him long before he ever wore a beard or learned how silence could ring in the ears. His hand closed around Ryan's ankle, mid-swing, grip firm but precise, stopping the kick inches from its target. Snow sprayed as Jack's boots planted, anchoring him in place. For a moment, everything froze. Ryan's smile faltered as he looked up, surprise flickering across his face before irritation replaced it. His eyes traveled up Jack's arm, taking in the corded muscle beneath the jacket, the stillness in his posture. Jack didn't squeeze, didn't twist. He simply held the leg, his expression unreadable, his gray eyes locked onto Ryan's with a calm that was far more unsettling than anger. "Not today," Jack said quietly. His voice was low, steady, carrying no threat and no apology. It was the voice of someone who had given commands under fire and expected them to be obeyed. Ryan tried to pull his foot back. It didn't budge. A faint flush crept up his neck, embarrassment bleeding into something sharper. He laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. He muttered something about minding one's own business, about having fun. Jack said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence between them stretched, heavy and deliberate. Slowly, Jack released Ryan's ankle. Ryan stepped back, adjusting his coat, eyes flicking briefly to the small crowd that had begun to form at the edges of the square, people pretending not to watch while watching anyway. His jaw tightened. He pointed vaguely toward Emily and Max, then toward Jack, as if mentally filing the moment away. "This isn't over," he said, his tone light, but his eyes promising something else entirely. Then he turned and walked off, boots still barely touching the snow. Jack watched him go, already certain of one thing. Men like that never walked away for good. Only after Ryan disappeared down the street did Jack turn his attention fully to Emily. She was shaking harder now, adrenaline and fear finally catching up with her. Jack crouched a few feet away, keeping his movements slow, non-threatening. Up close, he could see the dark circles beneath her eyes, the exhaustion etched into her young face. "You're safe," he said, though he knew safety was rarely permanent. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. "Thank you." Jack shrugged out of his jacket without thinking, draping it gently over her shoulders and around the puppy. Max let out a soft whine but didn't pull away. Instead, he pressed his head against Jack's forearm, instinctively recognizing steadiness when he felt it. Jack paused at the contact, something tightening briefly in his chest before he pushed it down. He helped Emily to her feet, making sure she was steady before stepping back. Around them, the square returned to its quiet routine, snow continuing to fall as if nothing had happened at all. But Jack knew better. He glanced once more in the direction Ryan had gone, his jaw setting. The trouble hadn't started here. It had only been seen. 3 days after the snowfall that froze the town square into memory, winter tightened its grip, and with it came consequences that moved faster than the storm. Jack Miller felt them before he saw them. The way people paused when he walked past the diner window, the way conversations dropped a notch when he entered the hardware store for pipe fittings. He was used to attention on missions, eyes following him because he was the one who went first. But this was different. This was suspicion, poorly disguised as curiosity. Jack kept his shoulders squared and his gaze forward, his beard catching flakes as he crossed the street, telling himself that silence was not guilt and stillness was not surrender. The video appeared that night, cropped, blurred, and framed to lie without technically lying. It showed Ryan Cole stepping back, Jack's hand on his ankle, the moment stripped of context and breath. A caption scrolled beneath it on local feeds. Veteran assaults local businessman. The word assaults burned brighter than the rest. Jack watched it once on an old phone he kept for emergencies and then shut the screen off, jaw tight. He had seen propaganda before. This was just smaller, cheaper, and closer to home. Emily Carter saw it too, on a cracked tablet balanced on the narrow counter of her kitchenette. She stood there in socks with holes at the toes, her thin sweater hanging loose from shoulders that had learned to hunch. Emily was tall for her frame, long-limbed and slight, with soft features that made people underestimate her resolve. Her brown hair was usually pulled into a quick ponytail, strands escaping when she moved too fast. She worked 2 jobs, one at a small clinic as a trainee aide, another at night-cleaning offices, because debt did not care about good intentions. When the clinic supervisor called the next morning, voice clipped and careful, Emily understood the shape of the threat immediately. "We're reviewing," the woman said. "Until then, it might be best if you didn't come in." Max sensed the change in her before she spoke. The German Shepherd puppy was already stronger than he had been in the square, his ribs less visible now, his paws steadier on the linoleum. He was still clumsy, still too big for his ears, but his tail wagged when Emily's hand shook because he believed movement meant comfort. He pressed his head into her knee and whined, a thin sound that scraped at the edge of her composure. She knelt and wrapped her arms around him, breathing into his fur until the panic dulled. Jack did not tell Emily to leave town. He did not suggest hiding. He showed up that evening with a coil of copper wire over one shoulder and a small toolbox in his other hand. The heater in her apartment had been coughing itself awake every night, rattling like it wanted to die. Jack knelt beside it with methodical patience, his long fingers steady as he adjusted valves and replaced a cracked igniter. He explained what he was doing without condescension, his voice low and even, teaching her how to listen for the click that meant ignition and the hiss that meant danger. It was not heroics. It was maintenance. Emily realized that this was how he helped, by fixing what could be fixed and not promising what could not. Outside, the snow kept coming. Inside, Jack showed Emily how to hold a phone so it didn't shake when she recorded, how to keep her back to a wall in public spaces, how to trust her peripheral vision. He taught her how to fall without breaking wrists, how to stand without inviting challenge. Max watched from the rug, head tilted, learning the rhythm of Jack's voice. When Jack stood, Max stood. When Jack paused, Max sat. It wasn't training, it was recognition. Ryan Cole watched too from the warmth of his father's townhouse, anger fermenting into a more precise shape. He had shaved that morning, the blade sliding clean over a jaw that rarely knew resistance. Ryan was not used to being denied. His wealth had smoothed his edges, softened his reflexes, but it had sharpened something else, his certainty that consequences were for other people. He called favors without raising his voice, a friend of a friend who ran a page, a cousin who knew a patrol sergeant. He framed himself as the victim of a volatile veteran, the words chosen carefully, sympathetically. He did not rush. He had learned early that patience could be cruel. The patrol car began to idle near Emily's building just after dusk on the fourth night. Jack noticed it because he always noticed patterns. The officer inside was young, clean-shaven, with a face that still tried to be kind. He introduced himself as Officer Ben Alvarez, voice polite, posture unsure. Ben was average height, dark hair cropped regulation short, a faint scar at his chin from something that had happened before the badge. He asked questions he did not fully believe, and took notes he hoped he would not need. When he left, he did not make eye contact with Jack, and Jack understood why. Being watched did not always mean being threatened. Sometimes it meant someone else had already decided. Emily's night stretched longer. Without the clinic shifts, money tightened. She cleaned more offices, came home with hands raw from chemicals, and fell asleep on the couch with Max tucked against her stomach for warmth. Jack stayed until the heater cycled properly, then left quietly, the way he had learned to exit rooms overseas, without sound, without wake. He did not sleep much himself. When he did, he dreamed of a dog running ahead of him through snow that never ended. The town began to split in small, visible ways. A woman at the bakery slipped Emily an extra loaf without charging. A man in a pickup muttered something ugly under his breath. The square where everything had begun grew emptier at night, as if the place itself wanted distance from the choice it had witnessed. Jack walked its edges anyway, his boots tracing familiar arcs, his mind cataloging routes and cover and the long, quiet patience that had kept him alive before. Ryan's next move did not come with a camera. It came with a letter slid under Emily's door, the paper thick and legal-smelling. It threatened eviction for violations that did not exist, cited noise complaints from neighbors who had never complained before. Emily read it twice, then a third time, her breath shallow. Jack read it once and folded it neatly, as if respecting paper might coax truth out of ink. "They're trying to scare you," he said. "Fear is cheaper than force." Max barked at the door that night, one sharp, uncertain sound, then retreated to Emily's feet. Jack listened, head angled, counting heartbeats. Nothing came, but the absence of footsteps felt intentional, like a hand hovering just out of frame. Jack felt the familiar pull in his chest, the one that came before missions turned bad. He did not tell Emily that. He made tea instead, steady hands pouring hot water, steam curling like breath in cold air. By the end of the week, the video had reached beyond the town. Comments hardened. Names were mispronounced with confidence. Jack's record, mostly sealed, was discussed by people who had never worn a pack heavier than their opinions. Emily's phone rang and then stopped. Silence returned, but it was a different kind, the kind that presses down, that waits. Jack stood at Emily's window one night, watching snow stitch the street back together. He thought about leaving, about how his presence might be the weight tipping everything worse. He thought about the puppy sleeping on Emily's feet, chest rising in a rhythm that had finally found consistency. He remembered a lesson learned the hard way. Retreat could save a life, but it could also invite pursuit. He stayed. Somewhere across town, Ryan smiled at a screen and closed a file, satisfied with the pace of things. He did not yet plan the end. He planned the squeeze. He had learned that pressure made people make mistakes. Jack felt the pressure, too, settling in his bones like cold. He tightened his gloves and stepped back into the night, choosing the long way around the square, choosing to be seen and unseen in equal measure. He knew now what standing had cost him. He also knew the cost of stepping away. Winter had not finished asking its questions. 2 weeks after the pressure tightened and the town learned how to look away, Emily Carter vanished without noise, as if winter itself had decided to keep her. Jack Miller noticed the absence before the call came. He was standing in the narrow alley behind the hardware store, breath fogging the air as he checked the sky for the kind of snowfall that erased tracks within minutes when something settled wrong in his gut. Emily always texted when she finished late shifts, always sent a short message. Home or Max asleep. Nothing sentimental, just proof of continuity. That night, there was nothing. By the time his phone buzzed with a panicked message from the clinic supervisor asking if he had heard from her, Jack was already moving. Emily's apartment door hung ajar, the frame splintered where a shoulder had driven into it. Inside, the space was wrecked with deliberate efficiency. Drawers dumped, cushions slashed, shelves overturned. It was not theft. It was intimidation. Jack crouched, fingers brushing the floor, reading the room the way he had read compounds overseas. No blood. No struggle that lasted. Fast hands. Multiple boots. He stepped onto the fire escape and scanned the street below, eyes cutting through the snowfall, until he found what winter had not yet claimed. Fresh tire impressions pressed deep into the slush, angled north toward the tree line. Max was gone. Jack followed the tracks on foot, staying to the shadows where the street lamps failed. He kept his hood up and his pace even, conserving energy, letting the cold sharpen his focus. Without a dog beside him, he relied on old habits, counting turns, noting wind direction, tracking the way snow piled higher on one side of the ruts. The tracks narrowed where the road met the forest, the tires slipping once before finding purchase. Whoever drove had panicked and corrected, an amateur mistake. The forest north of town was a place locals avoided in winter. Pines rose dense and dark, their boughs heavy with snow that fell in soft, blinding curtains. Sound died quickly there, swallowed by white. Jack moved between trunks with the quiet economy of someone who had learned to make himself small in hostile places. He found the turnoff by the broken fence post half buried in drift, the place where a vehicle had forced its way through and continued on a logging trail long since abandoned. An hour later, he saw the building. The warehouse squatted low against the tree line, a relic from a logging boom that never returned. Its metal siding was rusted, doors chained once and then broken, windows boarded from the inside. A single light glowed faintly within, flickering like a pulse. Jack slowed, breath measured, and listened. The wind carried nothing human, no voices, no engines, only the creak of stressed metal and the distant pop of ice shifting in the trees. He circled wide, counting exits, memorizing angles. Fresh footprints crisscrossed the snow near the back door, 3 sets, heavy boots. He timed the wind and slipped inside when it rose, masking the sound of his entry. Emily was tied to a chair near the center of the room, wrists bound with zip ties that cut white into her skin. Her face was bruised along one cheekbone, lips split where fear had become resistance. Her chest rose fast and shallow. She was conscious, eyes wide and bright in the dim light, scanning for movement until they locked onto Jack's silhouette. She shook her head once, a warning she didn't know how to phrase. Max was 10 feet away, locked inside a steel crate meant for hauling tools. He stood on unsteady legs, fur bristled, ears pinned back. His eyes found Jack, and he whined, a thin, desperate sound that cracked the quiet. The cold had leached into his bones, his breath fogged the bars, and frost rimed the metal where he pressed his nose. Ryan Cole stepped from behind a stack of pallets with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Up close, the polish fell away. His hair was damp with sweat, his coat unbuttoned, his breath ragged. He held a compact baton loosely, as if it were a prop. 2 men flanked him, local muscle with thick necks and dull expressions, their movements impatient. Jack clocked them quickly. No discipline, too much confidence. "You're trespassing," Ryan said lightly, as if hosting a bad dinner party. Again. Jack did not answer. He closed the distance with brutal efficiency when the nearer man lunged. A wrist broke with a muffled crack. The baton clattered. The second man swung and missed, momentum carrying him forward into a knee that folded him silently. Ryan backed up, shock replacing bravado. Jack caught him by the collar and drove him into the pallet stack, the wood shuddering. He did not overstrike. He did not need to. Emily sobbed when the zip ties snapped free. Jack cut Max loose next, lifting the crate door with a grunt and wrapping his jacket around the puppy's shaking body. Max pressed into him, all instinct and relief, his heart hammering like it wanted out of his chest. Jack felt the familiar alignment, the way weight and warmth could center a room, and then pushed it aside. There was work left. The sirens arrived sooner than expected. Jack heard them through the walls, distant but closing, a sound too clean for coincidence. He turned as red and blue strobed through the boarded windows. Ryan smiled from the floor, blood on his lip, satisfaction leaking back into his eyes. The arrest unfolded exactly as Jack had predicted. Officers poured in with weapons drawn, voices sharp. Emily was bundled into a blanket, questions fired too fast. Jack was cuffed without ceremony, his hands cold against steel. Ryan spoke softly to a detective Jack recognized by posture alone, a man accustomed to shortcuts. Statements were taken, photos snapped, context flattened. Outside, snow fell harder, erasing the tracks that had led Jack here. He watched Emily through the open ambulance door as they treated her, saw Max curled against her chest, finally still. She met Jack's gaze once, terror and gratitude tangled together, and nodded. Jack nodded back, a promise he didn't know how to keep yet. The cruiser door closed. The engine idled. Winter kept its counsel. Jack Miller learned the sound of time in the county detention center. It wasn't measured in hours or days, but in the echo of doors, the scrape of boots, the way fluorescent lights hummed without mercy. Weeks passed that way, measured, repetitive, intentionally dull, designed to grind a man down until confession felt like relief. Jack did not grind. He sat, broad shoulders relaxed against cold concrete, gray eyes steady, beard growing uneven along a jaw that had clenched through worse interrogations in darker places. He answered questions carefully, never more than required, his voice calm and unhurried. The detectives noticed that calm. Men who had never been shot at noticed it and mistook it for arrogance. Jack knew better. Calm was how you survived when the room wanted you to break. Detective Harold Vance led most of the questioning. Vance was in his late 50s, heavy-set, with a permanent redness across his cheeks and nose that spoke of long nights and older habits. His thinning hair was combed carefully to hide the scalp beneath, and his suit strained slightly at the buttons. He carried himself with practiced authority, but his eyes lacked curiosity. They were tired, transactional. Vance spoke often about procedure, about how things looked on paper, reminding Jack again and again that heroes existed only in movies. Jack listened, unmoved, understanding that Vance had already chosen a version of events that required the least resistance. Outside those walls, Emily Carter fought her own battle. Recovery did not come easily. The bruising along her cheekbone faded to yellow, but sleep remained elusive. She woke often, heart racing, hands clutching empty sheets, until Max shifted beside her and grounded her again. Max had changed after the warehouse. He was still young, still awkward in his growing body, but something in his eyes had sharpened. He startled more easily now, ears flicking at every sound, yet he stayed close, always touching, always watching. The vet classified him as emotionally fragile but responsive, a good candidate for support training if handled gently. Emily held on to that phrase, handled gently, as if it were instruction for herself as much as for the dog. She decided to testify the morning she saw Jack's name dragged across the local news again. Not as a suspect this time, but as a person of interest, the language vague enough to poison public opinion without committing to fact. Emily stood in her kitchen, light catching the thin scar on her wrist where the zip tie had cut, and felt fear rise, then settle. Fear had already taken too much. She put on a clean sweater, tied her hair back, and called the district attorney's office. The unexpected witness came forward 2 days later. Samuel Ridgway had lived near the northern forest his entire life. He was tall and spare, with a long, weathered face and skin tanned dark from decades outdoors. His gray hair fell to his shoulders beneath a battered ranger cap, and his beard was thick and untrimmed, streaked white. Samuel walked with a slight limp from an old logging accident that had never healed correctly. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care, and he distrusted institutions as a rule. What pushed him forward was not loyalty to the law, but anger. He had seen a young woman forced into a car near the logging trail, had memorized the plate without realizing why, and later recognized the same vehicle on the evening news. Snow had hidden his tracks, but memory had not failed him. When traffic footage resurfaced, pulled from a camera Ryan Cole's legal team had insisted was malfunctioning, the case shifted. The timestamp aligned with Samuel's account. The vehicle path matched the tire marks Jack had followed. The narrative Vance preferred began to crack. The courtroom filled slowly on the morning of the trial, winter light filtering through tall windows that dulled the room to gray. Jack entered in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders, wrists cuffed only briefly before procedure removed them. He stood straight, posture unbowed, eyes forward. Emily sat near the front, hands folded tightly in her lap. Max lay at her feet, wearing a simple vest identifying him as an emotional support animal approved by the court. His head rested on his paws, ears alert, gaze steady. He did not move. Ryan Cole arrived late, flanked by attorneys and confidants that had learned how to mask panic. His face was pale, his jaw tight beneath a fresh shave. He avoided Emily's eyes and glanced only once at Jack, contempt dulled now by something like fear. Behind him, his parents sat stiff and silent, impeccably dressed, their expressions carefully neutral. They had already decided how much of their son they were willing to defend. Emily testified first. Her voice shook at the beginning, but steadied as she spoke. She described the square, the kick that never landed, the warehouse, the cold metal of the chair. She spoke of Max, not as a symbol, but as a living being who had been terrified and helpless. The courtroom listened. When she finished, Max lifted his head and pressed closer to her ankle, a small, unconscious gesture that carried more weight than words. Samuel followed, recounting what he had seen in the forest, his voice rough but unwavering. He did not embellish. He did not soften. He told the truth the way the land had taught him, plain and unadorned. Ryan's defense attempted a final counterattack, suggesting provocation, exaggeration, misunderstanding. They played the edited video again. This time, the prosecution played the uncut footage beside it, the context restored, the lie exposed. The contrast was brutal. When the verdict came, it felt almost quiet. Guilty on charges of kidnapping and assault. Ryan Cole did not look at his parents as the words landed. They did not look at him. Jack was acquitted minutes later. The judge's gavel echoed once, sharp and definitive. Jack closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, but in release. The weight he had carried since the warehouse lifted, just enough for him to breathe. Outside, snow began to fall again, lighter this time. Emily stood beside Jack on the courthouse steps, Max between them, his tail moving in a slow, careful arc. The truth, it turned out, could survive winter after all. Spring arrived the way it always did in the mountains, late, cautious, and undeniable, slipping between patches of stubborn ice as if testing whether the land was ready to forgive. Jack Miller noticed it first in the mornings. The air still bit at his lungs when he stepped outside, but it no longer burned. Snow retreated from the edges of the road in narrow, uneven rivers, revealing dark soil beneath. The silence that had once felt suffocating softened into something breathable. Jack stood on the porch of a long, abandoned maintenance building at the edge of town, hands resting on the railing, shoulders relaxed in a way they had not been for years. He was no longer wearing borrowed suits or detention-issued clothing, just work jeans, a faded thermal shirt, and boots worn down by honest miles. The scars were still there, the beard still uneven, but the tension that once lived permanently between his shoulders had begun to loosen. He did not go back to war. The call came as he knew it would, an offer wrapped in duty, a return to familiarity. Jack listened in silence, gray eyes fixed on the tree line, then declined with a calm certainty that surprised even him. The battlefield had taken enough. He had learned finally that walking away could also be an act of courage. Instead, he put his hands to work. The building he stood on now had once been part of a logging operation decades earlier. Its bones were solid, its walls thick, its fenced yard overgrown but wide. Jack saw possibility where others saw decay. He spent weeks repairing beams, replacing broken panels, reinforcing gates. His movements were steady, deliberate, every task approached with the same focus he once reserved for mission prep. He installed heated flooring in one wing, built quiet rooms with soft lighting, and reinforced kennels not as cages, but as places of safety. The sign went up last, hand-painted in simple block letters: North Ridge, K9, Recovery and Training. Emily Carter arrived each morning before sunrise. She looked different now, stronger. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve that sat comfortably on her slender frame. Her hair, still chestnut brown, was usually braided back neatly, keeping it out of the way as she worked. Her skin carried the healthy flush of someone who spent more time outdoors, and her posture had changed, shoulders no longer drawn inward, but squared just enough to claim space. She had returned to the clinic part-time, but most of her hours were spent here, tending to animals and people alike. She cleaned wounds with the same care she once reserved for fear, and she spoke softly, with authority earned rather than forced. Max followed her everywhere. The German Shepherd puppy was a puppy no longer. At nearly 8 months old, he had grown into his paws, his body lean and athletic, his coat glossy under the spring sun. One ear still tilted slightly when he listened too hard, a small imperfection that gave him character. The fear that once defined him had not vanished entirely. It lingered in sudden noises and unfamiliar shadows, but it no longer controlled him. Max moved with confidence now, tail high, eyes curious. He was not trained for combat, nor would he ever be. Jack made that decision early and without hesitation. Max's strength was not in aggression. It was in presence. He became the first dog cleared through the center's recovery program, a living example of what patience could restore. Others followed. Dogs arrived with stories written into their bodies, ribs too visible, scars hidden beneath fur, eyes dulled by neglect. Jack learned each one the way he learned terrain, slowly, respectfully. He did not rush progress or force obedience. He built trust first, structure second. Some days were quiet and productive. Others tested every ounce of his restraint. On those days, Emily was there, steady hands and steady voice, reminding him that healing rarely moved in straight lines. A new face appeared one afternoon, leaning against the fence with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Sarah Whitman introduced herself with a firm handshake and an easy smile. She was in her early 40s, tall and lean, with sun-lightened blonde hair cut just past her shoulders and clear blue eyes that missed very little. Her skin bore the faint lines of someone who spent time outdoors and did not regret it. Sarah worked for the county's Animal Welfare Department, overseeing rehabilitation placements. Years earlier, a dog she had failed to save from an abusive home had shaped her career and hardened her intolerance for shortcuts. She walked the grounds with Jack, asking direct questions, appreciating his equally direct answers. When she approved the center's certification, she did so without ceremony. "You're doing this right," she said simply. Word spread. Volunteers came on weekends. Donations followed. The town, once divided, began to knit itself back together in small, meaningful ways. The bakery sent day-old bread for staff. A local contractor donated lumber. Officer Ben Alvarez stopped by once, out of uniform, awkward but sincere, to drop off blankets collected by his mother's church. Jack thanked him without comment. It was enough. On the last morning of lingering snow, Jack went for a run. The path wound along the ridge where the forest opened to the valley below, the ground damp but firm beneath his feet. Emily matched his pace easily now, her breath even, cheeks flushed. She laughed at something he said, an unguarded sound that surprised them both, and Max surged ahead, bounding through melting drifts, ears high, tail cutting the air. Jack watched them, a quiet warmth spreading through his chest. He realized, not for the first time, that he was no longer running from anything. They reached the overlook as the sun broke through low clouds, casting long shadows across the land. Jack slowed, resting his hands on his knees, heart steady. Emily stood beside him, close but not pressing, comfortable in the shared silence. Max sat at the edge, gazing out over the valley, alert and content. Jack straightened and looked around, at the town below, at the center behind them, at the two beings who had found their way into his life when winter had been at its worst. The past did not disappear. It settled. It became part of the ground he stood on rather than the weight on his back. For the first time in a long while, Jack Miller knew he was exactly where he belonged. This story is not really about a soldier, a woman, or a dog. It is about the quiet moment when someone chooses to stand up, even knowing the cost. Jack did not save the world. He did not defeat an army. He simply refused to look away when cruelty appeared in front of him. And that choice changed everything. In everyday life, most of us will never face snowstorms, courtrooms, or life-or-death moments. But we face smaller versions of the same test every day. Do we stay silent when someone is treated unfairly? Do we walk past pain because it is inconvenient? Do we believe that one person cannot make a difference? This story reminds us that kindness is not weakness, and courage does not always roar. Sometimes it is just a steady presence, a hand reaching out, or a decision to protect what is vulnerable. Healing, like spring after winter, does not arrive loudly, but it always arrives if we allow it. Max survived not because he was strong, but because someone cared. Emily found her voice because someone stood beside her. And Jack found peace not by returning to war, but by choosing compassion over violence. That is a lesson that belongs to all of us. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. If you believe in standing up for the vulnerable, leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you want more stories about courage, redemption, and the bond between humans and animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps these stories reach more people who may be struggling in silence. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. And remember, even the longest winter ends when one person chooses to care.